Well, good morning, everyone. It is with great pleasure that I am about to reveal some of the results of the Laterality Index Consensus initiative that we started a couple of years ago. When I was invited a couple of years ago by the Laterality Journal to join the Board of Consulting Editors, I came up with an idea that at that time thought was a brilliant one. And it was indeed endorsed by the editors, Marcus and Gina. And the idea was to come up with a consensus survey for laterality measurement. And the idea was that I have encountered, I saw over the years that people from the laterality community use different types of laterality indices, use different definitions of several concepts. And I thought maybe it would be nice to come up with some common denominator of these kinds of things and try to come up with some guidelines or recommendations or good use of laterality indices and find some recommendations to improve comparisons between studies. So that was the idea. Initially, my idea was to have experts come up with some statements and come up with some guidelines and recommendations. But then when consulted about this, Dorothy Bishop came up with the idea to use a Delphi approach. Now, I never heard of Delphi approaches before. So for the people who did not participate in the Laterality Consensus Initiative, I need some more explanation. What you need for a Delphi approach, and Delphi, of course, refers to the Greek oracle Delphi. What you need for a Delphi approach is a number of experts, an expert panel. You need some statements about the topics that you want to reach consensus about. And then you need a kind of a questionnaire, which is sequential. And you feed, you present the statement before the panelists. They say whether or not they agree with the statements. And then you analyze the data and you feed the results again to the panelists, the experts, together with the feedback of the other panelists. And so people can change their mind in a second round, or they can stand up defending their position in a comment box and stuff like that. And no two Delphi surveys are alike. So there is a lot of differences between them. There is no strict set of the number of rounds you should do or the number of experts you should have, stuff like that. Reading about Delphi methods reveals also some advantages of the system, but also some disadvantages. The advantages are, it's a very democratic procedure. There's no one who is more stronger or has a stronger opinion than the others dominating the debate because of seniority of publication record or what have you. It's also an anonymous kind of thing, which can be run online. So it's inexpensive and inefficient, and it can reach a wide audience of international experts. Those are really great advantages, but there are also a number of disadvantages. First and foremost, it can offer a false sense of objectivity, because when you have a number of experts, you come up with percentages of consensus about one statement, which are numbers and which actually give a kind of quantitative feel, while in essence, it's still a qualitative feeling that you're measuring, of course. Also, what do we mean by consensus? Consensus comes from consentire, feeling together. But how many people should we have feeling together to reach consensus? Are we happy with a simple majority, 50 plus something? do we need 100%? Probably not. But where in the middle do we go for consensus? What do we believe is consensus? And then statements can be watered down because the sharp edges of a good opinion may be lost as a watered down version and resulting in meaningless statements that represent the lowest common denominator of an idea. Some people say that Delphi surveys are useful to generate a debate, and that's exactly what we try to do, of course, but at best they are just an opinion, and it's maybe an inadequate method to reach a final conclusion. So keeping these advantages and disadvantages in mind, let me tell you what exactly we did. We started out in September 2009 by inviting experts by a snowball procedure. So we approached a number of people that we were working with different types of methods in laterality research. And in the end, I think we invited approximately 220 experts. 114 agreed, they replied positive to our invitation. 88 did not reply, maybe our mail got stuck in their spam box or whatever, and 18 kindly declined. Then, of course, after you gather an expert panel, you also gather a number of statements. Now, we didn't have a clear set of statements ready, so we asked the experts, you come up with statements. You come up with things that you say, this is important for the reliable and valid assessment or the calculation of a consensus, of a laterality index, sorry. And 106 experts submitted together 453 statements over the period of December 2019 until February 2020. These statements were astonishing. I mean, some of these statements consisted of short statements, 1, 2, 3 sentences, but other statements were whole paragraphs of text defending already a position within a statement. Some statements really had nothing to do with laterality indices. But so we needed to have, and of course, many people put forward the similar statements. So we had to come up with a plan here in order to order this, because all these statements were also over very, very difficult methods, behavioral methods, dichotic listening, visual half field research, handedness preference, handedness performance, I mean motor performance, motor preferences, but also brain recordings like electrophysical recordings, fMRI, FTCD, the brain itself, structural MRI. So we had to order this. I was, of course, not doing this by myself. So we invited 11 moderators to come up with a selection of these statements, ordering them. Similar statements were lumped together in a statement that was nicely worded. And so, and eventually we came up with a survey of 295 statements that were based on the input from the experts. But then we are March 2020. And a small virus then hits the LICI. And so everything else got seriously delayed, of course, because all the moderators and the experts had to think of ways to reorganize their research, reorganize their lectures. And so there were many other priorities than this initiative. Nevertheless, we moved on by sending these 295 statements again to the original experts and asked them, to rate those statements. And first they had to rate them on importance. How important do you think this statement is? And the idea was, if people don't find the statement very important, then we remove it from the next round. And the second question was, and how much do you agree with this statement? What's the level of agreement here? So this took from June 2020 until October 2020. And then based on the results, the moderators again went to work and removed some stuff that was deemed unimportant. And we prepared again a new survey, rewording some of the statements based on input from the experts into a 241 statement survey. And that survey was then again fed into the expert system again, and 95 experts there rated this selection of statements. Now, this time not anymore for importance, but only for agreement. And there was for each statement also a comment box in which they could defend their position if they thought differently about the statement and so on. And now we are busy in trying to make a paper out of all this, this work. And I try to give you some of the results. So this is the number of sections we made. So of course, some of the statements that were offered were very specific for one particular method that was used. And these, of course, were gathered together in these methodological technical sections. But there were also many statements that overarched many of these methods, and they were put in the general section, which was the largest section of them all. And it included not only stuff about laterality indices, but also questions about definitions. Clearly, as René Westerhausen rightly remarked, many statements do not have to do anything with a laterality index. But again, because experts provided these statements, we thought, well, they feel this is important to come up with some consensus on stuff, and so we decided to leave them in. All experts had to go through the general section before they could they could give input to one of the methods that they were experts on. And here you see the number of experts for each of the sections in round one, and here you see it for round two. Now, as I already said, there is no strict number of experts needed for a Delphi survey, but most Delphi surveys do not exceed, let's say, 40 experts participating. So this is really very good, especially for the general section. But you see there are some smaller sections in which we only have a few participants, and these are especially true for more novel techniques that are not widely used. I will now go, I will now attend to what are the experts? Who are these experts? And I tease them out here for each of the categories. But in general, we can say that most of the experts, they come from Europe. There is almost parity between male and female researchers. So that's very good. Most of them consider themselves in the field of cognitive neuroscience and experimental psychology. And more than 3/4 of the experts were really experienced researchers with more than 10 years of experience, more than 30 international publications, peer-reviewed international publications, and more than 10 years after their PhD. I will now go into the results of only the general section. The other section I will leave to later because otherwise I lose part of my audience. So the general section is here the most important. And we divided the statements. You see, the general section consisted of 48 statements in round 2, and we divided them into several subsections. For example, on relevance of the index, the formulas, which was I very excited about, because it would be very nice to come up with one single formula for the general LI that would be used by everyone. So I'm building up the tension here, you see. Then reporting laterality indices, reliability issues, statistical concerns, and decomposition of. Okay, let's start with the relevance. We're doing really good here. It's relevant to have a lateralization index that combines the results of the left and the right register recordings into a single measure that makes it convenient for statistical analysis. 99% of us agree with that idea. Secondly, also 99% agree with the idea that we should have some guidelines. Okay, so far, so good. Then we come up to the laterality index formulas. Agreement is needed on one single preferred version of the classical laterality index. 70% agree. Okay, so we gave them the options. These are the options. It's probably difficult to read this for you, so I put the formulas here. 24% says that we should use this formula depending on whether we use performance data or a reaction time, response time data. And depending on what you use, you should put the R, the right before the left or otherwise, so that negative values are in the left side of the graph and positive values are to the right side of the graph. So it feels natural to analyze it. It's convenient because we think from negative to positive in the number line. But only 24% agrees with this type of. Then the runner-up, 23%, says, yeah, we should depend performance and reaction time. We should change the formula a bit, but we also should divide the denominator by 2 in order to make the difference here relative to the number of observations. 23%. 20% says no. We don't need a common formula. Then 19% says we should always use this formula, regardless of whether we use performance data or speed timed data. And a minority says we should use always this more relative option. So the bottom line is there is no consensus regarding which formula to take. I will comment on that later. Second related question is the scale. We should come to a consensus regarding the scale of the laterality index. Again, 70% of the people seem to agree on that. But when it comes to consensus, the majority, well, it's not the majority, but the largest section says, okay, let's between 1 and -1 and +1. Then another group said, no, we should make it a percentage multiplied by 100. So between -100 and +100. 23% says no, and some people would like something else, but I don't know what that would be, but whatever. A second section was on, third section was on reporting laterality indices. Now, it was a long list of things that we should report when making our papers on laterality stuff. And I just summed up the ones that have more than 55% of consensus. Otherwise, the list would be much longer. It seems we can all agree to provide subject demographics like age, gender, and handedness. But I would suggest that this is one example of kind of a useless guideline, because that should be reported in every research, I think. But nevertheless, then people start discussing whether we should use gender or sex, and that's a discussion. Yeah, that's another discussion, I think. Describe the way, so give the formula, indicate a measure of effect size, confidence intervals around the laterality index, report right and left raw score values in a supplementary or in a repository or something, and also report individual laterality indices is also something that seems to convince many of the people. There are a number of others that do not reach the 55% criterion, and comments mainly say that coming up with lists of things you have to report are much too prescriptive. And if I provide you with the raw data, you can calculate whatever you like, and I can put in my article whatever I like. So yeah, there's a tension there between some people who want to have clear guidelines on what to report, and some people who say, if I give you the raw data, you should not tell me what to do. Reliability and validity. We have two statements here that reach the 75% criterion. Make best efforts to provide test-retest reliability data for tasks that are not widely used. And a crucial step of any approach for a valid quantification of laterality is a careful selection of the items. There, of course, comments go, yeah, great, but what are best efforts? And what is a careful selection? So it's not determined. And I'm especially concerned with the people here that seem to think that a careful selection and retest reliability is not that important. Okay. Statistical concerns then. You see, when things become more technical, the agreement seems to drop significantly. Here, we couldn't find any statement that reached the 75% criterion. So that one almost got there, and this is just a simple majority, I mean. Well, of course, these statistical concerns are real and existing. You should take into account severe non-normality of some of the data and statistical properties of the laterality index may be quite different from the statistical properties of the raw score data, and this should be taken into account. But one could also say this is quite a meaningless statement. Then calibration and decomposition. Again, some statements with strong agreement there. When you use cutoff scores, you should explain why you did this and articulate nicely why and how you did this. we should use specific terminology for handedness and make a difference between hand preference and hand skill, with handedness as the overarching term. And we should come up with a clear definition of what we consider a right-handed person, a left-handed person, and in particular, an ambidextrous person, and what is the difference between ambidexterity, mixed-handedness, and so on. There seems to be no clear definition, but people seem to want a clear definition on these matters. Some general observations then from the survey, and in particular from the general section. Experts in general seem willing to obtain a consensus on some important laterality index issues, for example, the formula that we're going to use. However, when we offer the different possibilities, there is no majority. Experts also would welcome the agreement on reporting certain variables, but then again, some people find this too prescriptive and say, if I give the raw data, you can calculate anything you want. Maybe we should refrain from using the term guidelines, as it sounds more imperative than, for example, recommendations. And some people are also gave in their comment box that they are afraid that giving a number of guidelines or recommendations might come over as a kind of a tick box for a reviewer, that if you don't present these data or this information in your paper, it will not be accepted, and they find this a constraint for academic freedom. We never, of course, and let this be very clear, intended to make laterality index like a harness thing in which you have to follow a number of rules. No, we just wanted to see whether or not we could find some agreement on some issues. And if you want to do something else, that of course is no problem, as long as you explain why the other solution, the solution you take, might be the better one. Now, what I told you was on the general section. The results are much more clearer on the other sections. And in the more methodological sections, there is much more consensus on technical issues. There are a number of practical recommendations that we can offer young researchers to follow or to try to use good practices. And the moderators are now working to make a list of them, and so we can offer a number of recommendations. Future directions. So a fair majority of experts would welcome clear recommendations of the use of laterality indices, and also for definitions for certain concepts. The statements, of course, a good statement is a short statement, but of course a short statement does not contain the arguments or the empirical support that is needed to endorse a statement. And maybe for some stuff, like for example the laterality formula, we might need a more focused and empirically supported effort to achieve an acceptable consensus, maybe in the form of a task force. If we, for example, could have some people with a good statistical background come up with a paper that, for example, would compare in a set of data, compare the effects of the different formula, that maybe would provide more empirical support and consensus on taking one of the options. So we think that it's been a nice effort, and it could be a first and humble step in a direction to find more consensus among laterality researchers. Thank you. And this, of course, And this, of course, my final slide. Thank you very much for all the people who went through hundreds of statements to fill in, and also for the moderators to have helped me enormously. And of course, Helena and Robin, who organized the survey.
I could imagine there are a few comments or questions about that.
Elisa Frasnelli, University of Trento. Thank you very much for this very, very important work. I couldn't imagine there wasn't such a consensus, especially on the Laterality index. And I feel I need to kind of almost apologize because I thought I started using R minus L divided by R plus L. But then I remember one of my mentors saying, no, use L minus R because it's like kind of natural. You go from left to right. And so only recently in a review of one of my paper, actually I argued that most people use R minus L. So I think it's really, really important that we need to agree on that, and it will make things much easier, both in animal research and human research. So thank you very much for your effort on that.
Thank you.
Just maybe a comment on the guidelines thing. So I'm doing a lot of meta-analysis, and this is a field where they have strong guidelines, right? So at the Prisma statement, that gives you like a 28 like item checklist, and you have to check this. And if you don't check this, the reviewers will write, oh, you forgot this, do this. And I think the field benefited tremendously from that because it forced people to have something like a unified standard, and it kind of prevented sort of like bad stuff, like really short, methodologically weak things. So I'm really not as opposed as you sounded to not do sort of a guideline in favor of academic freedom, because I think especially in the age of open science, you need to pre-register everything, and you need to have some sort of clear guideline what you pre-register. And for that, I think it would be very helpful to at least have one like clear citable recommendation, even if the consensus isn't so strong, to be able to just say like, hey, I'm doing this way, and I'm doing it because you did say that based on your opinion of these experts. And I think that would be worth a lot in order to unify science in our field and make it better.
I completely agree with you, Sebastian. And I also think that a number of, maybe let's not call it guidelines, but let's call it recommendations, should be followed. But I don't think we could do it based on this consensus. We should do it on stuff that, for example, the laterality formula should be based on more empirical support. But I noticed that Marco here is going to talk this afternoon about the future directions on laterality research, and maybe I'm looking forward to what he's trying to say about this type of stuff.
I won't say anything about that, but we could discuss it then, because it's a fair point. I agree with Sebastian. It would be smart to have guidelines, but it needs to be guidelines on which we all agree, right? I think we all agree on the fact that reporting gender age is imperative, but which exact laterality index you use is maybe not so imperative. Right. David had a question. Do you want to?
I do. Can you guys hear me? I'm not sure if the mic works on this.
We can hear
machine.
you. We can hear you.
Okay, I may be attacked shortly by a German-speaking oversized toddler, but I sort of asked the question in the chat, Guy. I mean, left minus right or right minus left, as long as you're clear and opaque, you know, again, it makes a difference, or changing the denominator of the formula changes the scale. But the more interesting one for me is one I don't think about in terms of dichotic listening research or visual half-field stuff, which is provide the raw data that went into the formula, because that can sometimes provide additional information. So I get that for manual lateralities, for example, you might make predictions about how the left hand of the right-hander should be the worst one. So I wonder if you want to comment on why some of our respondents think providing the semi-raw data is really, really important.
Yes, indeed, I think providing the raw data is important, and that's an issue that comes up again and again and again. And still some people seem to be hesitant about that. And maybe that's also something in line of what Sebastian said, is that maybe we should pull through and say, well, it's important for you to offer the raw data, either in supplementary material, in an open source repository, whatever. There are plenty of opportunities to do that. Yeah, I think it's important to do. I don't know whether I answered your question, David, but in any sense, the toddler took over.
Toddler took over. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Guy. Thank you.
Goodbye.